Welcome to this forum, hosted by Okemo Valley TV, in partnership with the Vermont Standard and our colleagues at Woodstock Community TV. As part of Okemo Valley's ongoing election coverage, today we welcome the candidates running for the state representative in Windsor-5. The district, comprised of the towns of Woodstock, Reading, and Plymouth. Tesha Buss, a Woodstock resident business owner in Plymouth, running as a Democrat, and Keith Cappellini, a resident of Plymouth, running it as an independent. Keith is also a member of the Plymouth Select Board. Welcome, Tesha. Welcome, Keith. First, we'd like to start out with some introductory remarks from each candidate, and you'll each have 1 to 2 minutes to just talk a little bit about yourself and why you might be running. So we'll start with Tesha.
Thank you for hosting this forum. My name's Tesha Buss. I grew up on a 4th-generation dairy farm in Illinois, and my parents lost that farm when I was 10. And I watched their resiliency as they then took over a very rundown tavern and turned it into a community-oriented bar and restaurant that now is employee-owned 38 years later. I took that chutzpah and opened 2 businesses in Plymouth in 2008, Good Commons, a retreat home, and a small transportation company. 2008 was the greatest recession since the Great Depression. And those lifts of those businesses took grit, and it took a lot of 90-hour work weeks. And I also became involved in my community. I joined the board of the Okemo Valley Regional Chamber of Commerce, and I led their energy committee. I was a member of the Rotary Club and was president for a year. I sat on the board of FOLA, Friends of the Ludlow Auditorium. I was the treasurer of this TV station. Then I had my daughter, and I called 13 child care centers, and there was no spot for her. So I strapped her to me and took her to work with me for 2 years, which was really hard. And when I got her a spot in Rainbow, I vowed I would not leave another parent in that same situation. So I led the charge to renovate a building and double child care for infants and toddlers in Woodstock. And when the pandemic hit and school was only in session for 2 days a week for kids, I launched a COVID learning school so that parents could go back to work and kids had a place to go. So when I see a need in my community, I rise, and that is the reason why I am running for state representative for Windsor-5.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Keith.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. As you had mentioned, I am a selectman over in the town of Plymouth. I've had the privilege of being part of several success stories during my tenure, whether it be our plan to redesign the town website from the ground up or redesign our entire town hall from the ground up and revitalize it, or structure a plan to collect upwards of $500,000 in back taxes that were owed for probably 6 or 7 years, or to use some ARPA funds to provide grants to businesses in the local community that were impacted by COVID. And I believe Good Commons was a recipient of such funds. So that was a very big success that we're proud of. I've also served on the Planning and Zoning Commission for the past 5 years. And I was a member to the WCSU School Board. I represented Plymouth, held one of the 2 seats there. In my private life, I'm owner and manager of roughly 40,000 square feet of commercial warehouse space. I have an advanced degree in development economics from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. In my free time, I am the single parent of a 7-year-old boy who attends Killington Elementary and avid hunter and fisherman.
Very good. Thank you. So let's get started with the questions, which have been prepared in conjunction with the Vermont Standard and their senior writer, Tom Ayers. So first question, and this I'll give to Keith first. What are the values and beliefs that have led you to run as an independent in this election? And you have about 1 minute, I think, to answer that question.
I chose to run as an independent for a few different reasons. The primary one being involved at the local level. I've seen what it takes to actually govern a town, govern a small populace, and if we relied on partisanship to do so, we would effectively get nothing done. So I think that there's something to be said for partisanship when it matters, but I think at the end of the day, how we've approached things in our town, when people come to ask for real things with real problems. I don't think it matters where one stands on whatever third rail of politics you want to touch. It matters, how we can collaborate to get something done. And I think if you pull the focus out and look at Vermont, in a bigger frame of focus, you see that our state legislature is kind of paralyzed by a single group dynamic, whereby nothing seems to get done because it's polarized by partisanship, and I'd seek to avoid that at all costs.
Okay, great, thank you. Tess, same question. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's what are the values and beliefs that have led you to run as a Democrat in this election?
Great. I was raised by some pretty far-right Republicans, and so you can imagine that dinner table conversation can be extremely spirited, and what it really takes is a large amount of listening to be able to make sure that you understand exactly where the other person's coming from, because I think deep down, we all have the same concerns. I think the approach that we take to making solutions is where we get tripped up. And so if you listen intensely and then can identify the common ground, then you can really start to make great change. I see from going door to door and hearing from potential constituents, we've got great programs in Vermont, but they don't always get to the people. There's a lot of red tape. There's an annual audit that makes something not make sense. This is where I feel like I have democratic values, but I approach it from a business person's standpoint. I've got to balance a budget, and I have to tweak my own costs and expenditures, and that's what I hope to do in the State House.
Okay, thank you. So next question. If you're elected on November 8th, what will be your top 3 priorities in the next session of the Vermont Legislature, and why? And you can have a little bit longer on this one. You can take up to 3 minutes if you wish to do that. And
all right.
Tess, you get to go first on this one.
Oh, excellent. Childcare, housing, and property taxes. So I'll start with childcare, which I've spent, as you know, I stated in my opening remarks that I've dived deep into this subject. But we really have a workforce issue. It's not a housing issue. We have qualifications in Vermont that don't match our neighboring states. So you have a teacher that's qualified as a lead in New Hampshire, and they come to Vermont to work, and they're qualified as an aide, and that's less money, and they have to repeat educational requirements. We don't have reciprocity. So when we hired an executive director with 2 master's degrees, she still had to take extra courses to become qualified as an executive director here in Vermont. So removing those workforce challenges wouldn't cost Vermont any more money, but would bring more people into the workforce so that we could operate at capacity. So when we get to housing, we've got ancillary dwelling units, which are helping to bring one at a time housing online. And we can do those in Section 8 without a lot of red tape. But when we talk about bringing more meaningful units online, we need umbrella administration. So there is an economy of scale. You got 18 units. That doesn't necessarily, we haven't figured out how to make that fit in Windsor-5. But if we can have an umbrella that administers many different properties, then we could bring them on, Section 8 housing them, and then get them through the annual red tape and annual audit costs. It's $8,500 minimum for an audit for Section 8 housing. If you only have one house, that's not going to financially work. And for property taxes, 10 years ago, we tried to study this in the legislature, and it was so complicated they couldn't study it. So I'm extremely interested in hearing the income-based property tax system to see if that's a better one. But right now, I think what would help Vermonters is to pause the trigger on a town-wide assessment. We all have towns that had properties sold for over-assessed value. It's going to trigger a $70,000 assessment for probably each of our towns in Windsor-5. So if we could pause that for 5 years so that we could study the property tax system to make it more affordable, and then it would help Vermonters in that interim.
Very good.
Thank you.
Keith.
I'm going to agree with Tessa in terms of some of the issues she pointed out, most especially the property tax issue, which I deal with head on almost every time I step foot into a select board meeting. The grand list scheme that we have here in Vermont puts working class families at a serious disadvantage, which has led to the ensuing exodus of said working class families. It's an affordability crisis that kind of hinges upon a system of inflated real estate values that mostly relies upon second homeowners that buy grossly inflated residences to use as second homes, and this, of course, it skews the property values across the board. So what I think needs to happen is we need to, definitely pause this county-wide, or it's really a statewide reassessment, so we can take a closer look at, things like the gold towning, which is another, leg of the same tripod, whereby most of the tax money coming into a municipality doesn't even, service the needs of the local residents in terms of education. So it's kind of a conundrum that we totally need to reconfigure, which translates into my other two areas. Education, I would definitely focus on, a closer look at Act 46 and what that's done to the cost of education and what it's done to local communities in terms of decreasing or diminishing, in the case of Reading, for example, a school in this district, which is being forced to close, eclipsing local autonomy in terms of school control, which I think is something Vermont did right, and something that should be celebrated rather than frowned upon. The primary focus of my tenure, if I was elected, would be economic development. I think that, based on my training, I look at economic development through two different lenses. One, a wider lens, what's going on in the world and the country at large. There's a move now towards reshoring and friendshoring of key production. And then you take a closer look. I brought this little box along with me here. I mean, I don't know if you could see this, but this was my father's. He was a machinist at a high school. This was made 10 minutes from here in the Precision Valley. And if you, you look at go to the Precision Valley Museum, you see the rich history that came from there. It was a bombing target during the Second World War. It's provided all the rifles for the Union Army. If we, can look inside this little box and get back to where, I think we often overlook that as Vermonters, go back to our roots, refocus, we can do things like they just did in Syracuse, until recently Syracuse was a dying city in upstate New York, claimed to fame, overdose capital of the United States. Now they're going to have the biggest, micron chip plant in the world with, upwards of, 50,000 jobs, starting to 50K a year, and 9,000 jobs, 100K plus. So my question would be, why wasn't Vermont at the table to those discussions? And I would want to bring us there.
Thank you. So if I could just do a kind of a quick little follow-up, and I know you both talked kind of broadly about issues, whatnot, but if you were to speak with people in your own district, in the towns of Woodstock, Reading, and Plymouth, what would you be hearing are their most important issues to them?
I hear housing and childcare, for sure.
Okay.
Rainbow Place School has a list of 100 families, 100 kids that need a spot for care. And I know Bridgewater is experiencing similar numbers. I mean, everyone's on everyone's list, of course.
Yeah, it's challenging everywhere, for sure.
It's challenging.
And Keith, what might you hear?
Dollars and cents. There hasn't been a person I spoke to that's not frustrated with property taxes. Again, I mean, there's no easy way to skin that cat. I mean, the ensuing, as I say, different lenses you look at the economy through. It's a lot of things that are, quite frankly, out of our control. The affordability crisis at the current, in the current economy has a lot to do with things that we can't address, but certain things we can, like price of energy, for example. That's something that, and the legislature's done things in the past, like the price of electricity. We've kind of eclipsed our more reliable coal and nuclear options in favor of natural gas. Well, now Vermont's grid is highly reliant on the very turbulent natural gas market, thanks to things like Ukraine and whatnot. it's very unstable. And there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal on Monday talking about New England's electric grid, and the primary guy in charge of it is in New Hampshire said, yeah, we're basically one cold winter again, away from a total collapse of this grid. There's no way we can sustain it. So, there's things that the legislature can do to make people's lives easier. When they come to you and say, diesel's, $6 a gallon, and I got to how am I going to run my excavator, and how am I going to,
Makes for challenging times, that's for sure.
Right.
All those issues. Okay. So we kind of touched upon this just a tiny bit, but we're going to go a little further with it. Act 250 reform is a perennial topic of debate at the State House each year. Governor Scott has argued for years that strengthening the Land Use Act would help spur sustainable economic development in rural communities and help address the statewide crisis in access to affordable housing for Vermonters. What are your thoughts about Act 250 and its potential reform? And you have about 2 minutes each to answer this question. I think we start this time with Keith.
Well, our predecessor, Charlie Kimball, spearheaded some movement on that in the legislature. To my knowledge, he did make an impact. I don't know how large, but I know from owning land in Plymouth, it's very difficult to do really anything. It's the process of even just permits. I think this is an area that Charlie did address. The permitting process and the paperwork. It's just it's exponentially burdensome. For if you take a husband and wife that want to start a business. And there was somebody up by I want to say it was near Barnet. Yes. Where they wanted to do a farm to table type place, and the Vermont Digger did a story on them. The hoops and that they had to jump through, and the red tape that they had to cut through just to do something on their own property was, they were ready to just throw in a towel and give up. And that's, there's, given the type of economy that is presented as being the right thing to do here, that's kind of a large roadblock right in the way if you want young people to come here and try and do things that are in tune with the land. And I think there's a way you can have your cake and eat it too. If you go across the river, you can appreciate nature and you can still preserve the environment. I lived in Germany for 3 years. I mean, they have sustainable factories that are powered by the wind within cities. So, I think that it's a political will to cross certain bridges that are seen prohibitive, but they're really not. If you make the move and do it, you can respect that, have your cake and eat it too, as I say.
Okay. Tesha.
Thank you for this question. I opened a small business here, and it is challenging. Pat Moulton came to visit me soon after I opened, and her first question to me was, how hard was it? And I said, thank you, Pat. That's an acknowledgement of the achievement here, and it's strong. And, when I came in to permit Rainbow Play School, I just had to amend an Act 250 permit, and that took some time. I've also worked in Section 248. That's how you permit solar fields. It's very, very similar to Act 250, and it's very challenging. I work with the Small Business Development Center here in Vermont. I have for many, many years, basically since the second year I was open in business. That's when I learned about them, and they are an unbelievable resource. Every business should be contacting them. They helped me so much, but what they do now is they also help to get other people through the permitting process. But if the business is big enough, they say you have to hire an Act 250 specialist to get you through this. So I think it's working. It's helping people. So now 80% of applications get through Act 250 in less than 3 months. What costs they spent to get there, that's what I'd like to figure out, because that could be very debilitating for most businesses that get going. how many businesses do we not see actually even reach the permitting process? So I do think we have some work to do on making that process more streamlined. I think in terms of housing, the legislature did a lot of great work to make housing easier. And I think that these umbrella districts in downtown development would be great for Act 250, so that in that whole downtown sector, you knew that all your boxes were checked off to a certain degree, and then you could move from there. It would save a lot of downtown business owners a lot of time and money.
Thank you. Okay, you mentioned housing, and that kind of moves us right into the next question. There's a dearth of information about childcare options for single and working parents of children ages infant through 5 is a daunting challenge in Vermont and nationwide. It's particularly true in communities in the Upper Valley. What policies do you advocate at the state level to help address the problem for Windsor County families? I've got a couple minutes for that, Tessa.
All right, great. Well, some of it is going to be a repeat before certainly looking at the qualifications for teachers. And the biggest other barrier for our workforce is pay. We have this very high standard, and we used to pay between $13 and $16 an hour, and that just does not work. And while it is going to be expensive to put money towards childcare, to bring more centers online and to bring assistance into that workforce, it's going to be equally expensive to have all those parents not working and contributing to our tax base. I think that one way to bring centers online in the future would be to work with the affordable housing and workforce housing developments. If we could make some first floors, looking at our districts and where there is a need for childcare to be in closer proximity to our working population, it'd be great for us to partner. Childcare centers don't have the skills to do development. If I didn't have the permitting skills at a state and local level to help Rainbow move, that wouldn't have moved. And we would be shy 18 infant and childcare spots. So I think helping cross-sector businesses would be a really great way to help childcare and help the working families of Vermont.
Okay. Keith, same question.
Yeah, my son grew up working right alongside me. I mean, for that very reason, oftentimes there's nobody to watch him, but he learned how to do a whole bunch of stuff, which will hopefully help him out. But look, in Vermont today, there are, I think about 13,000 kids under 3 that need care. There 70% of children 6 or under have both parents in the workforce. In July, a report that the legislature had mandated the year before was released, and they, basically in a nutshell said the system of childcare in Vermont is broken, and they listed several reasons, the primary being overlap between too many agencies, understaffed, and just unable to, facilitate anything meaningful because there's just too many people, too many, Indians, so to speak, or too many chiefs, not enough Indians. But the way to rein that in, Governor Scott had a plan to, in the case of pre-K, universal pre-K, when it came out in 2016, they lopped it in with the Department of Education and the Department of Human Services, and there was all that overlap. So that was Scott's latest plan to try and dump it all within the Department of Education and eliminate a lot of that overhead. It's received some tepid welcome, but the jury is still out on that. What I personally believe, I think the solution is more of a local thing. In our town, we in our community center, which was once our school, we helped fund a local child care program, which has been, as long as it's been running, it's been a great success. My son's gone to it, and lots of kids from the general area have attended it, and I think that looking at dying infrastructure in little towns like ours, you can resource and repurpose buildings that you may not be, or until we did this, the building was empty. So that's what I mean. There's ways around, creative ways around the dysfunction at the larger level.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the movement to kind of education, preschools and whatnot. Certainly, my background was in education. I was a principal. We saw a tremendous increase in before school and aftercare programs, which obviously tries to help single parents and parents who are both working to have some place for their children to go when they're at work. So, I mean, it's a challenge for sure. I hear it all the time. Okay, thank you. Next question. What is your position on Vermont Proposition 5, the Right to Personal Reproductive Autonomy Amendment, on the statewide ballot on November 8th? Do you support or oppose amending the Vermont Constitution to add language protecting the right to personal reproductive autonomy and prohibiting government infringement unless justified by a compelling state interest, and why? And Keith, I think you get to go first on this one.
We're going to touch the third rail, huh? Well, I got my thing in the mail, amongst others. I'm sure everybody's gotten. I am staunchly libertarian in this regard. I do not advocate legislating morality on any issue, whether it be, abortion, marijuana, so forth and so on. I see this as, mainly an existential crisis. Vermont, abortion is legal in Vermont, and it will remain to be legal. I don't see, in the context of, surely as a state legislature, it'll be an issue that we would be required to vote on, as we're required to vote on other third rails of politics. But in the scope of, what, as I mentioned earlier, what's required of a state rep or a local government official. I mean, these are, how you fare on abortion, one way or the other doesn't factor into, how do I, can I get some tax break? Can I appeal my taxes, so forth and so on. Even Roe versus Wade, made clear that after 3 months, the state had some ability to regulate abortion. Is this, in the term of late term, which I think so many people have made a thing about, the late term part of it. So, I think I'm a firm believer in, living by the consequences of your own actions, and, whether they're good, bad, or the other, we all know the results of what human intercourse can produce. So, it's up to you. I mean, the existential crisis I mentioned, I think, a lot of the folks shouting from the rafters now, my body, my rights, my body, are the same folks that were, during COVID shouting, mandatory vaccines and mask our kids. And, I think it's a double standard that, should be, couched in realistic discourse. Same could be said of Article 16 in the Vermont Constitution, which has been there since Vermont was a republic. I mean, if I was to bring that up, I mean, there'd be plenty of people that say, the right to personal self-defense. Well, that's passé, or that's a thing of the past. But, these are those issues that I think at the end of the day resolve themselves. I think people really want to get things done. And, as I say, dollars and cents, I don't think people are really focused on this. That's my take.
Okay. And now how about we hear your take, Tessa?
I support the passage of Article 22. I voted yes for it. I did my ballot already. I think it's really important for Vermonters to understand that Article 22 does not change how our medical community looks at late-term abortion. Late-term abortion still has to go through an incredibly scrutinized process. So if you reach 21 weeks, 6 days, and you need an abortion, it's because it's pretty medically intense. You have to go through the review board at the University of Vermont, and only 4 to 6 happen every year. And these are intense situations: fetal abnormality, the fetus not being able to exist outside of the womb, or the mother's passing if childbirth became the ultimate end. And this is what we really need to understand. I believe in enshrining these rights so that if there is a legislative session that wanted to flip this and choose to remove that freedom, they wouldn't be able to do that in one biennium. Enshrining it into the Constitution gives us this right for a really long time. And using the terms that some people consider confusing, they're typically legal terms, and that's the reason why our legislators chose them, to make sure that that it would be protected to the strongest degree possible.
Okay, thank you. And that brings us now to the wrap-up time, and we'll ask for closing remarks from each of you. And you, again, can have a minute or two to give some closing remarks. your overall plan and what you're hoping to accomplish, or whatever you'd like to say to the public in a closing remark. And I think we start this time with Tesha, I think, don't we?
Okay, even though I did first opening remarks, but
Did you want to do
oh, sure, I'll go first.
Okay.
So, I just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to the public and answer these questions and let everyone get to know us a little bit better. I've certainly stated my priorities already, and it's to help people affordably live in Vermont, to stay here, to raise their families here. I think we really could take a real strong look at our overall tax structure, not just property taxes, but how we do all of our taxes. And just like I do every year in my business, if we could open up how programs go from being the great ideas that they are to the end user, I'm sure we could tighten up so many systems and make things more cost effective and more efficiently delivered. That's my style. I try to find solutions that are cost effective and delivered efficiently. So thank you again for this forum, and I ask for your vote here in Windsor-5 for state representative.
Thank you. Keith?
I also appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and thanks to you and to Patrick and the crew for making this possible. I'd like to say that I've enjoyed my experience at the local level. It's been quite challenging. I never knew how challenging it would really be to represent a town, even just in matter of fact stuff. That at its core is why why I decided to throw my hat in the ring, because I think the satisfaction you get out of helping people at that level, solving people's problems for them, it's inspiring that that's possible. That's on the level that it is in Vermont, and that's what I think makes Vermont special. And that we do have, and this isn't often it's you don't appreciate it. It's like you live in paradise, but you don't get out and enjoy the sun. It's the same in Vermont. Like a select board meeting, sometimes you can literally drop the proverbial pin and hear it because no one shows up. But it's there for the taking, and that's why I think the idea of a state representative, it's so important, because Vermont is a small place. You can know your state representatives. You can actually be part of the process. You can come to a select board meeting. You can influence policy. You can meet your state reps and really get something that wouldn't happen in, like, I grew up in Florida. You'd never meet your state rep, or maybe would not have the impact you would at this level. And I appreciate that about Vermont. That's why I'm inspired to run, and that's why I hope to to be able to represent Plymouth, Reading, and Woodstock.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly there's a lot to appreciate about being in a small state, that's for sure. So we thank you both for coming this afternoon and spending some time in this little forum that is obviously sponsored by Okemo in conjunction with the Vermont Standard and Woodstock Community TV. Questions, as you know, were all prepared by Tom Ayers from the Vermont Standard. And I think it gave us some good information about where each of you stands. And I wish you both well, and hope that whichever one of you gets elected, you help solve some of the problems that we're all facing here in our beautiful state of Vermont. Thanks very much.
Thank you.